Welcome to the GAR Museum and Library, Camp 8 Sunday Union Veterans, and the Ladies Auxiliary number 10. My name is Hal Myers. I'm the president of the GAR. And today we'd like to present to you our Lincoln program. We have a big interest in Lincoln around here. We really like them. And we try each year to do something about this time of the year for it. We'll have people to come up here later on, such as Alana and Brother Jerry over there, who will be talking about Lincoln, and she'll be talking. And we were supposed to have Mary Todd Lincoln here today, or Lady Patraser, but she took ill, and so she won't be here today. So we're sorry about that, but we'll do our best. Perhaps if I can go through the closets around here, I might find a gown, I could take her place. I've done that before. There's sometimes you have to do things, you know what I mean? But anyway, what I'd like to tell you is that, you know, I don't know how many of you people really know about Abraham Lincoln, or what you really know about Abraham Lincoln, but there's a lot of things that over the years I've read so much about Lincoln that there's things about him I find very surprising. And I would imagine that for most of you, you would think that Lincoln was strictly against slavery for his whole entire life. Well, that's not exactly true. He wasn't. And the thing about Lincoln that amazed me was that he himself was born a Southerner. Abraham Lincoln was born in Hodgesville, Kentucky, February the 12th, 1809. He was there until he was 7 years old when his father decided to move across the Ohio River to Indiana. During the time that he was there in Hodgesville, Lincoln only went to school 1 year, period, never went no more. And the reason for that, and he was asked by a biographer, why did you only go to school 1 year? He said, because the teacher didn't know any more than I did. So that solved his problem, but he did learn enough about reading and writing that he really didn't need it anymore. And if you know anything about Lincoln, you know that Lincoln was a great poet writer. He wrote a great many beautiful poems. And he was really, really very adept at writing. So anyway, he goes on and he moves on into Indiana. And then, of course, you know, him and his father were the type of people that never got along. His mother was Mary Hanks, and he really loved his mother, but he really had no use for his father. Him and his father didn't get along. And one of those reasons is that when they went to Indiana, and as Lincoln got older, he was going out and he was doing various jobs to make money, and they had this farm they had to run, so his father, Thomas Lincoln, would take whatever Abe made, his father would take it. And more or less, Abe would just himself felt like he was a slave. So therefore, him and his father didn't get along. And back in those days, not so much like these days, that a lot of us realize when you get 18-year-olds that you can just go off and your mother and father can't say nothing about it. Well, unfortunately, back in those days, Abraham Lincoln had to wait till he was 21, because if he went off before he was 21, his father could actually send a sheriff after him and bring him back and keep him until he was 21. And this is basically what people did back during those days. Now, Thomas Lincoln, his father, didn't like slavery, and Abraham Lincoln did. And when Abraham Lincoln in Hodgesville, the population was about 7,000 people, but then the black population was like around 1,200 people. And so during that time, he probably seen all of what was going on. So then once he got into Indiana, when he came 21, he moved to Salem, Illinois. And he went down there, and then of course, then he took on various jobs. He was a farmer, he was a storekeeper, he was a surveyor, he was a legislator, he was a lawyer, he was a politician. And all of these things he earned on his own. And for everything that Abraham Lincoln could get his hands on to read, he would read it. And he would continually write. And so when he was there in Salem during that time, then he decided that he wanted to study law and become a lawyer. So he got the Blackstone books and he studied and he became a lawyer. During these times, he took a couple boat trips down the river. He went to New Orleans twice. And while in New Orleans, he seen what the slave trade was really about. but it really had no effect on him, none whatsoever. It didn't really bother him when he realized that this was the way it was, and that for some reason or another, it didn't really affect him. So as time went on, and as he became a lawyer, then he became a legislator. Now, once in 1847, when he became a legislator and he went to Washington, D.C., now the big problem come up about slavery and moving it westward. And this is where Lincoln kind of began to notice that this wasn't really a good thing for the nation, that if they allowed slavery to move from where it was and move out west. Now, Thomas Jefferson made that mistake back in the early 1800s with the Louisiana Purchase, when he let it go out as far as Missouri. And when he did that, that really disrupted the whole concept of moving slavery west. So it became a big thing. In the years of 1847, all the way up until almost the 1860s, I'm sure that all of you heard of Bleeding Kansas and the big problems they had out there with slavery, pro-slave people, free slave holders and all this. They had big arguments, they had fights, they killed one another. And that's why they call it Bloody Kansas, because that's exactly what it was. And these are the kind of things that Lincoln, when he was a legislator, wanted to avoid. But the thing about it is that he was only one person. Once, in 1849, when his time and he lost the election, he went back home, he went back to being a lawyer. So during that time, he must have been doing a lot of studying about this slavery business. And so he also then started quoting the Declaration of Independence and some things in the Constitution. But his big thing was that he kept reading and reading. And back in those days, when you went into an office or somebody's house or wherever it was, you would see copies hanging on the wall. So there had to be times when he seen these things and he looked at it, and the thing that really got him is that all men were created equal. And he quoted that many, many, many times. Well then, as time went on and he was lawyering, now all of a sudden it came up again where he could run for Congress. So in the 1850s, he started out again on the trail. And if any of you ever know, have any of you heard of Stephen Douglas? You all know who Stephen Douglas? And the great debates between him and Stephen Douglas. And it was here that he really got into the slavery business. You could never call Abraham Lincoln an abolitionist, because he was not one. And at the times that he was on the circuit and in the debates with Stephen Douglas, Stephen Douglas many times shot at him about slavery. And these were the things that when Lincoln really, really, really got into it and he realized this is a big issue and somebody's going to have to step up and do something about it. So his thing was that he said in one of his debates with Stephen Douglas many times, I have no intentions whatsoever of interfering with slavery where it now exists, but I will not stand by and watch it expand out west. And he basically meant that, and that he made that his life's thing from then on. It wasn't until 1854, 55, 56 that he really, really got involved with slavery. Up until that time he did. Now you gotta remember one thing, his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, who he married on November the 4th of 1842, was a very rich woman. Her father was a banker in Lexington, Kentucky. They owned a big, beautiful house there. And they also had slaves. And she was a Southerner. And Lincoln went there many times. And he never once ever said anything about the slavery, the slaves there, how they were treated. And they had about 12 or 13 slaves. So she was used to it. But Lincoln didn't get used to it. In 1841, him and his friend, Joshua Speed, was going down to St. Louis to visit Speed's sister Mary. He was on this steamer, and while he was sitting there on the steamer, he noticed this group of Negroes being brought on the ship, all chained together, as he claimed, like a bunch of fish on a trout line. But the thing about it was, Lincoln seen these people, and he said, he writes about it. He said, they weren't very unhappy. He said, they all gathered together. Here they are with chains around their necks, chains around their ankles, chains on their hands. They're all singing happy and all joyful. So he said, himself, he believed that these people were very happy in what they're doing here. So you see, even at that time, it didn't dawn on Lincoln. But it didn't dawn on him until as time passed and that really happened, that he decided, you know, we can't let this happen, and we cannot let it move out west. And so when it came around that after a while he did not win the election to be Senator of the United States to Stephen Douglas, and he lost. Now he went on the circuit to just speak basically to different crowds about slavery. And so when he did that, people began to sit up and take notice about the way he spoke, how eloquent he was, and what kind of a man Abraham Lincoln really had become. Nobody paid any attention to him up to these times. You know, he was a good lawyer. He was a funny lawyer. He was a guy with funny anecdotes. He was a good writer. He could do it. But then they began to sit up and take notice and listen to him. And so once they'd done this, then they decided, you know, this man could be president of the United States. Now you got to know, up until the 1850s, they weren't known as Democrats and Republicans. Abraham Lincoln was known as a Whig. And then they changed it and they made them Republicans. So then he became the Republican nominee for president of the United States, and of course, you know, he won. So in 1860 he became president of the United States. So then he moved on to Washington, and he already knew he was in trouble, that there was going to be a great civil war. And this was predicted many years ago by Thomas Jefferson and many others, that sooner or later, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a civil war. And there was a civil war. And then it came about, when that Civil War came about, that Abraham Lincoln, on March the 4th, 1861, when he gave his inaugural address, he emphasized over, and over, I will not interfere where slavery now exists, but I will not let it expand westward. Well, that didn't appease the people in the South, and of course, as you all know, South Carolina seceded from the Union. Of course, then after that, 7 more states succeeded. And then after that, several more succeeded until it got to 13, but then 2 changed their mind, it came back down to 11. So then, now he's faced with the Great Civil War. But the one thing that Lincoln could not do, realizing the South felt like that he was depriving them of his rights, the one thing he couldn't do was fire the first shot, which he never did. But the only thing that Lincoln really wanted to do was, it wasn't so much as being president of the United States where he could free the slaves. The object is to preserve the Union. That's what Lincoln wanted to do, preserve the Union. And then, it wasn't until 1863 that the more he talked about it, that this occurred, the Emancipation Proclamation. And on January the 1st, 1863, it became the law. And then, of course, in 1865, the 13th Amendment was created, and that abolished slavery altogether. But the thing about it is that Abraham Lincoln really didn't want to do that. You know, he had really thought, he had to think about it a lot, because he had to remember what he's doing. Because his biggest problem is with 4 million slaves in the South, what am I going to do with all these slaves once we free them? He had thoughts. He wanted to send them to Haiti. He wanted to send them down, put them on ship in the Caribbean. He wanted to just move them right out of the country. But that would have became so expensive that it wouldn't be economical to do it. So then the best thing to do was just let them filter in northward. And this is precisely what happened. And then, of course, once that happened, and then, you know, it made it harder on people in the north and elsewhere. But anyway, this was happening, this is what he did. But now I want to, in Abraham Lincoln's life,